Daniel P. Douglas, his book is called Truth Insurrected, The St. Mary Project. You can go check out Dan's website at danielpdouglas.com. Again, Dan, thank you so much for setting aside a couple hours and being here with us this evening.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm having a great time. You know, I have to laugh. I really enjoy your theme music. It's giving me Twin Peaks flashbacks, I think. If you recall, it sounds a little bit like the music from Twin Peaks.
It does. What it actually is that is Henry Mancini's. The song is titled An Experiment in Terror. It was written for the movie called An Experiment in Terror. That version, though, with the voiceover, was used in the 1970s on WGN television in Chicago for the Saturday night creature feature movie of the week that used to come on. And the voiceover work was done by WGN's Marty McNeely, who passed away just recently. And we've been using that for, we're going on to 5 years of doing it. And it surely fits, without a doubt.
It's really cool.
It is cool. It is cool.
Yeah.
I remember when I was a young kid, it wasn't so cool because I was scared to death at a young age. When Creature Feature came on, my parents would let me stay up and they would watch that, and I would kind of hide around the corner. And all those movies, of course, compared to what's out today, is nothing. But I remember that being out for many, many years, and just a great theme.
Stuff like that's funny. I mean, I remember as a child. Well, I shouldn't say as a child. Well, it wasn't that. I mean, it was like 5 or 6 years old. But I remember. I don't know if you ever remember one of those monster movies. It was a Japanese monster movie. It had some actually Americans in it. But it was called War of the Gargantuas. Do you recall?
Yes, I do. I do.
Yeah, I remember that being on some Saturday afternoon TV. Film of the day kind of thing.
Right.
Growing up, and I would hide when that movie came on, but to this day, I mean, I love that movie. It's like the movie Jaws. Scared me to death when I saw that, but it's now one of my favorite films.
Now you can watch it over and over. It's so amazing, Dan, that all the I think the kids of today. I was talking a little bit before the news break about Facebook and social media, and those are some of the things that when I was growing up and I was young, and it was just about every town. I didn't care where you lived in the United States. There was always that Saturday afternoon scary movie, whether it was on the on one of the UHF channels,
right,
or it was later at night. There was always the weekend thriller movies, usually on Saturdays. And I remember in the fall, especially, it was getting cold and rainy. Sitting in the house, and in Chicago, we had a program on called Thing Theater, and they would show all these the old B movies, the old stuff. Great movies. I love everything about that genre. I love everything about them. I need to go to a couple they have those horror movie cons. I've never been to one, and I want to get to one of these days, because I've actually had the few horror hosts that are left, and there aren't many, we've had on the program. And it's just, again, I think it's a genre of some interesting things, and I think it brings us all back to a simpler time.
Yeah, definitely. And you know what? Speaking of your show and the guests that you've had on and things like this, I wanted to make sure we were talking about trying to, your book is kind of a way of maybe introducing the subject to younger people or whatever. And when you think about the population as a whole, I mean, everybody needs more of an introduction to these topics, because a lot of these are so stigmatized, and it's thought of as fringe or paranormal or whatever. And I just got to say, I mean, my hat is off to you, your guests, your listeners, because you're participating and leading, in many cases, the dialogue about a lot of these subjects. And that's so important. If we're ever to get anywhere, we need to talk about it. And so that's why it's such an honor to be here on your show. I feel like there's really big shoes I'm trying to fill when you're talking about Ben Hansen and some Lee Spiegel and then some of these other folks that have been on. But my hat's really off to what you and the station is doing.
Well, thank you. Well, we feel that it's. I used to do the show. We used to do the show six nights a week. I'm an IT person by day. I'm an IT contractor by day, and it was we used to do the midnight to 2 a.m. slot here at K-Talk. And we did it Monday through Friday. I know there's a lot of people that would like to see it come back. The problem was getting home at 3 o'clock in the morning and then trying to get up when the alarm went off at 7 a.m. and go to work an 8-9 hour job.
Sure.
And we did it for over a year and a half, and really enjoyed it and brought on so many different guests. And we've been doing the Saturday show for, like I said, we're in our 5th year of doing it. We feel that it's something that needs to be done. I love to get authors like yourself on, people that do the research. Let people listen. You know, one thing, and I've been actually bashed for this. I've actually received emails when we get some guests on that talk about the fringy type of things. You know, I'll get an email and someone will say, well, you need to correct them, or you need to shut this person down, or why didn't you challenge them or question them? And what I really find interesting, Dan, is on some of these subjects, it's truly going on your own beliefs and thoughts. How can you challenge somebody on something that you have no tangible proof of? Like I've said so many times, until that flying saucer is sitting in the Smithsonian, it's going to be kind of a tough one. But
Sure.
if I didn't believe in those things, and I am a believer in that, I wouldn't be doing the program. But I really think it's important to let people like yourself, different authors come on, researchers, talk about what they're doing, and people can make up their own mind at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. And as far as the complaints go with the territory and anything like this, or issues of course I get my own fair share of criticisms too of my work. But the fact is that the dialogue is ongoing. If a person feels like they need to get a different perspective out or have something questioned, it's not like your show is the end all be all. It's the start of something, and it can continue in other ways, and that's what's really important. And that's kind of why I'm trying to at least write about the things that I care about, which, some of which will fall into, certainly Truth Insurrected falls into that kind of fringy territory, so to speak, but it's a darn important subject. I mean, the thrust of the book, again, Harrison in the novel is really not so much concerned about aliens or UFOs. Yeah, he is, as awed by that whole prospect as anybody, but he's after justice. And there's very real, not just new territory to explore, but there's very real-world issues that are tied into so many of these things. We were talking about the weather earlier, and there are some interesting theories out there as to what's going on with our weather.
Right.
And some might consider those fringe theories or want them dismissed or not taken seriously, but why? Let's talk about it. Let's at least explore it and keep an open mind.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit, if we can, with your being in the military, and some of your the intel stuff, the things you worked on. Another, and I call this, some people get a little upset and they say it's not a fringy subject, but I think it is a fringy subject, is the whole 9/11 deal, because there are so many things there, Dan, that just they just don't add up. I think now that we've gone many years past 9/11, I know that more and more people are coming out talking about things. I mean, I know there's some people that claim that those were holographic airplanes and this, that, and the other. I truly believe they were jetliners. They struck those buildings. Those buildings came down. But there is a lot of things that are questionable. The one I've always questioned from day one is building number 7, coming down at 5 o'clock at night with what I would equate to nothing more than garbage can fires burning on a few floors. The whole subject of 9/11 is there's a lot to that.
Oh yeah, and it's a sensitive enough subject still. I mean, obviously, it will take us decades to kind of wrestle with the tragedy and meaning and significance of that incident or that event, life and world-changing event. Because let's face it, the world is very different since 9/11, and in a way that maybe could be a foundation for how some of these theories have come about that question, what we've been told about what actually took place there. I don't, dismiss any of those because, and this isn't so much a reflection of the work that I did. Unfortunately, it's a reflection of what I have seen our government do historically, and even just as an outsider. I mean, we've done some pretty nefarious things. serve our agenda. Now, I'm not saying to me, I maybe am a little afraid of getting into looking at 9/11 too deeply, because actually I was in D.C. at the time, and I sort of know firsthand what was going on. I was afraid for my life, basically. But
Sure.
anyhow, I have to be honest, though, and this is just not me as an intel analyst or working in that realm, but one of the things that always seemed off to me about that day, that fateful, tragic day, was, okay, I could see maybe one plane managing to be hijacked for this purpose, maybe two, but four, which has always sat with me. It feels rotten. Something stinks about that. Now, it could be that we just had a really poor airline security and safety system, but apparently we knew something was going to be happening. That's the other thing that bothers me about this. And, there was all this blame on the intel community, when in fact I wouldn't have put it past maybe the administration, kind of like, the stories that we hear about FDR knowing about Pearl Harbor in advance.
Right.
Kind of letting it maybe happen, or being just uncertain enough to maybe not necessarily act on it or whatever. So it's a very touchy subject, and just me as a person knowing our history and some of the nefarious history that we've engaged in over the years, that there could have been some role in government in that. If not, at least incompetence, maybe something more. It's scary, though. I don't like to think about that, because trust in our government is at such a low point. And if somehow there was something more to that day than what we think happened or sort of witnessed, then that's a pretty scary prospect.
Oh, it is. It is. And there's a lot of, again, you've got the conspiracy stuff, and there's a lot of people out there that have different theories, but then there's just a lot of things that to me
don't add up.
They don't add up. They actually look strange. Just a lot of things that don't add up, and Building 7 is definitely one of them. The other thing that I always thought was quite strange was the private company, and I don't know the names, so I'm not going to throw them out there, but the private company that was hired in, that was paid, I believe, over $6.5 million to do just the basic cleanup in the city. That was a private organization. It was not the city itself. Had ties to the board of directors of companies where Dick Cheney sat on the board. This was the day. I mean, 3,000 plus lives were lost, and here we're worried about spending the money to clean up the city. How does that happen so quick like that?
Right.
Just little things. There's all those little things, and I agree with you on the plane crashes. It is kind of strange that there were 4. And where is the Pennsylvania plane? I mean, there's no wreckage to be found. Or the Pentagon one. All the cameras and stuff like that, there's just the explosion we see, nothing else. And some things just don't add up.
Yeah, and it's, so it is, it's very, and we're really not that far out from it. So it's going to take some time, I think, for let me put it to you this way: those gut feelings, those sort of things those are important things to listen to, and I think too often we dismiss those things because we don't trust in them, our gut instincts. I mean, I can tell you that in my career, gut instincts have mattered and do matter. So if you're having those kinds of questions, I mean, I don't know. I think I know what the truth was. I mean, these alternative possibilities frighten me, but I've got to admit, look, if I feel something in my gut that isn't right, it's probably telling me something that it's not right. So I would just say I think it's fair enough. I think it's very fair for people to question what they've been told, what they saw happen, and to continue to research it as best they can. I don't fault anybody for doing that. I don't say, oh, those are crazy, fringe people. Why are we paying it? No, nonsense. If there's something that's not sitting right. I don't blame anybody at all for trying to get at the truth.
You know, with the line of work that you were in, Dan, after 9/11, obviously things had to go through the ceiling. Of course, aviation travel has changed. I mean, that day did change it completely.
Right.
It really did with with the TSA and Homeland Security and stuff. Being in the military at the time, what was the feel? I mean, and again, we don't talk about specifics, but what was what was the feel for you when that happened? I mean, were your superiors, the people you work for, report to, the people underneath you? I mean, was it a mass hysteria type thing, or was it a wow? This is we never saw this coming, or never thought it would happen, and now what do we do? Was it controlled chaos, or it had to be interesting?
Yeah, let me just clarify for the moment. I was a civilian at the time of 9/11.
Okay.
My military service was when I was back in the 80s.
Okay.
So I'm dating myself, and I always, people always ask, or when I mention I was in the military, they assume that maybe it was related to something more recent. And no, I always say I saw the Cold War basically from Germany, from West Germany, but. I was a civilian at the time of 9/11, and I happened to actually be living and working back in D.C. At the time. So I can tell you, as a civilian, it was terrifying. I mean, I remember that morning. I was actually running later than usual to work. I was having to travel on the subway, on the metro system to work to get to near where I worked, and my metro station was above ground, and we came out of it. And we had a perfectly good view of all the horrendous smoke billowing out of the Pentagon. And the next thing they announced was that the train would not be stopping at the Pentagon because it was on a route that would take it to the Pentagon. And they basically said due to a terrorist attack. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, what the hell is going on? So as a civilian, and just as a normal human being, I was terrified. And fortunately had good friends that I worked with. Once we got all together at work, we actually then, work was shut down basically, and we were part of the mass exodus of D.C. at the time, and we just spent the whole day together, watching the news reports right. and trying to make sense of it all. But I imagine if people were working, I mean, yeah, it was bedlam, right? Because we know, we've seen or heard accounts of people who were working, at the White House, at the Capitol, at the Pentagon. I actually knew one of the guys that was in the Pentagon on the side of the building where this thing came in, and the story he told afterwards. Of course, it was panic and kind of controlled panic to get out of there after the plane slammed into the building, but. They had just now this may play into some sort of conspiracy theory, but they had just completed a major kind of refurbishment of the Pentagon itself, strengthening it, making it capable of withstanding certain blasts and impacts, including changing the glass in the building so it wouldn't shatter into a million pieces. And he was describing how all he saw was this kind of wavy glass then falling into chunks basically onto the floor, and fire erupting everywhere and that kind of thing. So it was, for those who were in D.C. or in New York or involved in trying to track down the other plane before it crashed, it must have been just unprecedented as far as what they were thinking and feeling and experiencing.
Yeah, I matter of fact, I knew somebody that lived just south of D.C. in one of the suburbs there, and he was telling me that within a day or two they had like these gun turret type things started appearing. They appeared like large turrets. They were parked in different places, and again the jets, the constant sorties, the constant flyovers. It was just nonstop.
Yeah, it was odd. It was very weird. A lot of armed, military and police and barricades everywhere. And the weird thing was the sky. It was no planes except for the routine roar of jet engines, and it started to really grate on you after a while because it made you feel like, when's the other shoe going to fall, basically.
Now, were you in the intelligence business as a civilian?
That's right. Yeah. When I was in the military, I was in military police.
Gotcha.
And then when I was an intel analyst, I was a civilian, working for one of the government agencies.
That had to be interesting post 9/11.
Well, and it was, and actually, it obviously influenced much of my work because much of my work did focus on terrorism. It actually took me overseas, took me to Iraq in 2006, and it was the summer, and I emphasize the summer in Iraq was, it was 120 degrees, but took me to Iraq for some time there, as well as Guantanamo Bay, and then to Israel. And all of this was related to the support that I was providing for my counterterrorism duties and so forth. And these were, Iraq was pretty rough. As a intel analyst over there, of course, I had it pretty easy compared to troops and others who were facing real serious situations. But Israel was fascinating. They have a different way of doing things, a very serious way of doing things. And all I can say is between Iraq, Cuba, and Israel had the better food and sightseeing.
Really?
I miss my hummus from over there. But in any event, so it took me, it certainly the post 9/11 world took me, into the realm of terrorism cases and to some of the places where, we have some concerns about these things or people suspected of doing certain things.
How was that again? That had to be pretty scary because going to these countries, especially Iraq, as a civilian. I know years ago. Again, I've been in the IT business for 30-some years, and I know years back there was a lot of guys back in the 80s and 90s that were taking on contracts in Saudi Arabia. And the money that they were making was just, I actually had a good friend of mine that went there for 3 years and came back with more. I mean, we're talking several $100,000 in the early to mid 80s. And it's enticing, and at that time things weren't so crazy. But now, especially with ISIS and all these other terror organizations, to be a civilian over there, boy, that's, I truly believe you're taking your life in your hands.
Well, the area that I was in at the time was pretty well protected, but I happen to know a person who was just recently over in Afghanistan as a contractor. At least he was supposed to be over there in Afghanistan. He had an American security clearance, but didn't have a NATO security clearance. So he kind of sat out most of the time that he was to be working over there, but got paid his contractor fees, which were very healthy. But what he said that was very interesting, that they'd had an incident there in Afghanistan where it was within a secured area, but in an Afghani who had been fully vetted ended up killing some. I can't remember if it was troops or if it was they were essentially people that trusted this person. It was on an air base, and he shot them and killed them. And so, anytime a contractor went out, and he was telling me now, if a contractor goes out over there to work with anybody, they're with an armed guard. And it really inhibits their work because they have to wait until an armed guard is available to take them. So it's very dangerous. I don't think you could pay me enough to go do the work of what these contractors do because they're fairly exposed, although now hopefully they're more protected than they were before. But I was in a fairly protected area. And there were the occasional mortar attacks and things like that, but fortunately they weren't very good at aiming those mortars, so I didn't feel terribly threatened. But it's a war zone and it's a mess. And again, talk about how do you solve those problems or fix those problems? It's going to take a very long time, if ever, frankly.
Well, the new thing that I have been, I follow so much about 9/11, and one thing that I've been catching some little bits and clips and pieces on is the possibility of the capture and killing of bin Laden. His anniversary is coming up pretty soon, and now there's talk about potential terror attacks again on that day. Do you think a lot of that's propaganda by some of these groups, or are some of these groups, in your opinion, bigger and more dangerous than we realize?
In my opinion, I think they've proliferated so much and operate so differently. But the problem is we tend to generalize and think about them as kind of a monolithic group, and there are really so many different splinter groups. I mean, and frankly, it's gotten to the point where ISIS, terrorists have always operated on a different kind of wavelength than, when we think of traditional enemies, maybe that we're in combat against or something like that. But ISIS really takes that into the realm of the insane. I mean, I don't really understand, and I guess that's the point. They're not really about anything except trying to incite Armageddon and draw as many people into that as possible. But I think we have to be careful when we talk about these different things that are happening and not generalize and think of them as, they're all Al-Qaeda or something like that. There's just so many different splinter groups. It's not even funny. I do have a fear of it. Well, it's already spreading to different countries in terms of ISIS, and apparently I just saw a headline today about them, or maybe it was yesterday, about them spreading into the Caribbean, which, that's getting kind of close to our neck of the woods, and it's a frightening world that we live in. I think we just have to be on guard at all times.
I agree. Dan, we've got to take one last commercial break for this hour. Sure. Our guest tonight, Dan Douglas, sorry, was reading that wrong. His website is danielpdouglas.com. All right, everybody, welcome back to Fringe Radio. Our guest tonight, Daniel P. Douglas. His new book is called Truth Insurrected, The St. Mary Project. You can find it on Amazon or go to his website at danielpdouglas.com. Again, Dan, it's an honor to have you here, and thank you for sharing your experiences with us.
Oh, you're so welcome. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Now, I've got a bunch of questions that came in for you.
Sure.
Okay. We got a group of students that are engineering students up at the University of Utah, and they tune in as a group every Saturday night. I don't know what they're partaking in. The emails get a little bit stranger as the night goes on, but they're a great bunch. Tracy writes in, says, Dan, how far away do you live from Walter White's house?
Oh my goodness. Well, it's, before I answer, I do want to say I actually was driving on a road one day, and I had to stop because they were filming right there.
Really?
They had to shut down traffic, do whatever they were going to do right there on the road, and then they let us pass by. And it was a real privilege because I think they were probably filming for their last season. I live kind of in the boonies here in Northwest, the West Mesa area of Albuquerque. So, it's a stone's throw to just about anywhere
right
here in Albuquerque. So not far from Walter White's house.
Did you see a lot? Did they do a lot of filming in and around town there?
Oh yeah, definitely.
I think that's one of those programs that put Albuquerque on the map. Yeah. Of course, there were a lot of movies made there over the years, just like Utah. There's so many big feature films. There's different. Well, of course, Monument Valley, is in so many films. But we're starting to see more and more stuff be filmed here. Of course, when Touched by an Angel was on TV, that's when I first got here years ago, 20-some years ago. They were filming downtown all the time. But some of these little more rural states, there's a lot going on. But that had to put Albuquerque on the map.
Yeah, it sure did. And I think some of the controversy was, oh my gosh, we got a meth dealer as what's giving Albuquerque attention, but nonetheless, great show, great cast, and it certainly was something that the town was very proud to have here.
Are they filming What About Saul down there as well?
I believe so. Now I got to say I haven't really followed it since the show ended, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah. Well, you know what I find interesting. Bryan Cranston, is an amazing actor.
He is.
And what I really found interesting about the whole thing that he's talked about is, of course, it's been a couple of years, so now it's off the air. But of course, at the end there, everybody thinks everything's over. But I know they've interviewed him in a couple different interviews, and he's actually talked about mentioning that how do we all know that Walter's really gone? Because you don't know. I found it pretty interesting. But sometimes, like so many things, it was a great run. It's over. Let it be. When they try to revive it, is when then now it's just a moneymaker.
Right. You're right. Definitely.
The next question I had for you that was sent in, one of our good listeners in the, I believe, Cleveland area, Sky writes in, she says, does Dan believe disclosure will come within the next 10 years?
Well, it's a fascinating question, and it's usually put, as to why is disclosure, why is it so hard to get disclosure? I think in a lot of ways we've already had it. We just don't realize it. So it's hard to predict a time and date when there's supposedly a moment when disclosure will take place. But I think a lot of it has already happened. And I actually think the bigger issue, let's face it, Area 51 is not a secret. There's all this evidence, or at least research that's been done on UFOs for decades. I think we kind of get the picture that, at least some UFOs are extraterrestrial, and that maybe there's a certain degree of contact that has occurred. I think it's been disclosure done very cleverly, but I think the issue with holding up more, or perhaps having that moment, is that how they've kept a lot of this stuff secret over the years puts a lot of people in jeopardy, and I'm talking about in criminal jeopardy, because I do believe there's been a lot of, I mentioned the word nefarious earlier. It's actually one of my favorite words, because I think there's been a lot of nefarious stuff done on the part of agencies in the government, our government, secretly, illegally, and that's what really holds up full disclosure, is that if they start letting things out, it's going to raise some questions that, people may not like the answers, especially those that need to be held accountable.
I agree. Well, I don't know. Did you get a chance to watch the Jimmy Kimmel Obama interview the other night?
I got the highlights because it was all over the social media,
right.
Facebook and stuff like that. But pretty interesting from what I saw. What are your thoughts?
Well, it was interesting because we actually had Ben Hansen was on last week, and he did the matter of fact, one of the Fact or Fake Paranormal Files shows he did on Sci-Fi was him being an ex FBI agent, an intelligence agent. He actually took the Clinton film, the Clinton interview, and tore it apart. I mean, literally frame by frame. We had a couple conversations offline about it. I mean, he put days into it, looking at eye movements, all the different things that they do.
Yeah, stress test. Yeah.
Right, and he said that Jimmy Kimmel actually said that during the show about Ben Hansen dissecting Bill Clinton's interview. And so I believe him and Lee with Huffington Post, they're starting to put some things together. And I don't know, it was interesting. It was kind of I think it was kind of a nod to a yes, but couldn't talk about it type of thing. I don't know. My whole take on, if you want to call it the subject of disclosure or honesty or truth or whatever, I think that people in general, there's going to be those that believe, those that don't believe. I just think that if for whatever reason tomorrow the president came out and said, you know what, Roswell was real, this was real, that was real, people would sit back, the American people would sit back and say, well, then why did you lie to us for so many years?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It's sometimes, like it or not, you got to keep the lie going to keep moving forward.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, I think the secrecy now has a life of its own. The lying has a life of its own. It's no longer about keeping something a secret that maybe at the time was maybe the right thing to do, although we could debate that. But, you know, I think now it's just built up its own life unto itself. And let's face it, knowledge, secrets, that's power. And so, I mean, I really do think there's a lot more going on there are a lot more dimensions to the disclosure question than whether aliens are real and the Roswell thing happened. I think it's about politics. I think it's about power. I think it's about money. And I also think it's about potential criminal culpability.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, the other thing too, this is kind of my spin on this, and I'm sure you've heard this many times before. You know, we always hear that term of, has an alien presence infiltrated the government, and they're using the government as pawns. I don't know if I really believe that, but what I will go out and say is that, first of all, if there truly has been, communication or contact with an alien species, and a government has access to that, sure, I could totally understand that. I could totally see that.
Yeah.
I really could. It's no different than, Russia trying to gain superiority, or the United States trying to gain it, or whatever country. Sure, you're going to use whatever cards you have on the table.
Right, exactly. And, and I'm not saying every UFO is an alien or something like that, but I think, what's transpired over the years, there's some pretty significant, I think, people say, oh, there's no scientific proof or whatever. That's nonsense. They're just burying their heads in the sand. I do think what you described is plausible, and I think that, it's funny, we're sitting here talking about it, so it's almost like we already know maybe what the truth is, so maybe disclosures happened a certain way, but certainly more to come, and I think for us to even begin to understand it, understand the phenomenon and our place in the universe with these other intelligent beings, that there needs to be a much more open and fair-minded and scientific process and cooperation, and it needs to be destigmatized, and we need to get going on a path of real true scientific study of this subject.
Well, and I think too, Dan, in our in our age, if you will, in the age that we're in, I mean, let's be realistic. Technology has moved forward fairly aggressively in the past, let's say, 100 years, if you want to call it that, maybe less. In the scheme of things, I mean, we're in the infancy stage. Kind of like the old Star Trek analogy. We don't want to visit the planet until we know they're ready. And maybe there's a little more to that than you think. I believe that looking up in the air and looking at all those galaxies, every now and then I get an opportunity to go down to Lake Powell on a moonless night. You lay back on a clear night and you look up. You don't need a telescope. Just look up, and you sit there and say to yourself, if there's nothing out there, wow, this is a pretty lonely place when you could see those galaxies with your naked eye.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, it really puts it all into perspective. And I think, yes, we as a species, we've advanced a lot and we've learned a lot, but and I think most people would agree, let's face it, we've just scratched the surface.
Right.
And I'm always fascinated by the question, if we've been around a certain number of years, but somebody did get maybe a million years head start on us, what would they look like? What would they, what would they be able to do? I don't think we'd be able to comprehend it. So I think there's a lot of possibility. I think the odds are much more in favor of it being a pretty crowded neighborhood than us being out there on our own.
Well, and I think too, when and I think that's sometimes Hollywood sensationalism that's put in there. But when we talk about the little grays, or we talk about this type of individual, or that reptilian, or whatever, well, I think what's really true is that we adapt to our environment. A baby, a human baby, let's say, is born in a lower gravity. Let's say, the big thing now, of course, is to get to Mars and colonize Mars. Probably not going to happen in full big numbers in my lifetime or yours, but maybe 100 years from now it will. Well, how does a human child develop in an atmosphere where the gravity is much less? Will they be taller? Will they be shorter? Will they be more elongated? I mean, I think that we adapt to our environment and evolve to our environment. So some of these creatures that, again, that's the Hollywood sensationalism that throws the scare factor in. It's just the environment that they adapted to. But to us, maybe an alien would see big, white eyeballs hanging out and a nose, and well, maybe that scares the hell out of them. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we might be pretty frightening too, right? Yeah, so,
exactly.
I mean, I think we've only just begun to explore our universe, and I think we really need to get over ourselves and take our place at the galactic table and say, you know what, if these things are real, let's start with, an admission of that and go from there.
Exactly.
We can't be kept in kindergarten forever.
Exactly. Dan, 2 hours flew by so fast.
Sure has.
I want to thank you for being here, and would love to have you back again in the fall and talk about more of your work. And when's your next? When's the next book going to be out?
So the first book of the Outworld series, it's called War Torrent, and there's information about it on my website. But it should be coming out in the next, I want to say 2 to 3 months somewhere. It's getting almost to the point where it's going to go into the publication phase. So look for War Torrent next, and many other things to come after that.
Well, sounds good. Well, I want to thank you again for giving up your Saturday night to be with us. It was an honor to have you here. Great talking with you about all these subjects. And let's plan on getting you back in summertime or when the other book is out, and let's continue on.
That sounds great. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, Dan, take care, my friend. Good night and have a great weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.